Okay, let's do a speed run of the Excel Esports case Census. To start with this one, I could use group by, but I don't know. I like pivot table. I'm gonna do, well, first I'm gonna make it a table. Let's make this a table first. So let's call it D for data. All right, so now I want to make a pivot table based on D for data. All right, so now I want to know the total, not the total population, but the total number of households is, I believe, what this was asking for. So just look up this here, call these pivots just in case I need them later. All right, life expectancy at the stated age. I'm just gonna make these simpler so I can use them as a lookup, right? And now it's just label lookup D, this on this, but it can't be a number. So I'm going to add this empty string to make sure that it doesn't have the number, and it's got not the whole table, but it is all D all, right? And I have to multiply by 12 and round to the nearest integer because we put it in months and not in years. All right, so now we're going to need average income per person, right? So what? This is going to be what? Total income and then per person income. So the total income for the city is the number of households times the average household income, and then the per person, right, is that divided by the population. So now we just look up this on the city, returning the per person income. And it needs a round to the nearest integer. All right, so now we're going to do 6-figure cities, 4-figure cities. All right, so 6-figure cities, 4-figure cities. So 6-figure city is if your big income is greater than or equal to 10 to the 5, then 1, otherwise 0. And the 4-figure one it's based on if your lower income here is less than 10 to the 4, then 1, otherwise 0. And it's asking me, are you in either one? So I'm going to make a special city here. So if you're in there, you're in a special city. So now let's say I made another pivot table here, and I want this to be based on change data source, right? It's got to be based on data source D. So got to refresh it. And then I want to know if you're in a special city, right? Then what is the sum of the population? Also, if you're just anywhere, right? I need to know what the sum of the population is also, because that's going to be part of this, I believe. So if we look up for this state, what is their total population and what is the population that lives in the special cities there, and then it's, this divided by this times what the population per 100,000, so 10 to the 5. It's that, and it also needs to be rounded to the nearest integer. That should be it, unless there are no special cities. If there are no special cities at all, then that's going to give us an error, in which case you can just go ahead and return 0. All right, how far apart are these cities? Well, now we got to look at our map, right? So I'm going to use my X to call here. This gives me the addresses of the cities. So I look up this to get the address of one city. Same thing for the address of the other city. Now I've got a distance formula, right, between references. If I set -1 for diagonal allowed, that will give me a Pythagorean. So it is that times 1,000, right, because that was in cells. So that's in meters. And then I'm supposed to, what, divide by the unit, right? So I look up this unit on here, returning on here. And last but not least, round that to the nearest integer. All right, quick check that everything's right so far, which it is. Now I got to make a box. All right, so let's start with X text split this by the colon to get my two pieces here. And then I'll text split sideways, right? Using regular text split this. Going to multiply by 1 to make them numbers, right? And what do I got here? So this is the row minimum. This one is the column minimum, right? This one is the row maximum. And this one is the column maximum, right? Just so I don't get those confused. Now I've got this map of Excel state, but it's not like normal A1 is 1, 1, but they did, the case author did a little offset here. So I got to undo that. So ref to RC of this, right? That's the actual coordinates on the sheet. Make that to row, and then I subtract 2. That's like the hardest part of this case, is remembering that you got to subtract 2 from the coordinates to get the correct coordinates. So now I've got the correct coordinates for every city, which I'll just, paste values over here. So this is the row and this is the column. So is it in the box? Let's see. So, and the row number's got to be greater than or equal to the row minimum. And the row number's got to be less than or equal to the row maximum. Column number's got to be greater than or equal to the column maximum. And the column number's got to be less than or equal to the column maximum. And I did that one wrong. This one needs to be greater than or equal to the column minimum. All right, so if all those are true, then yes, we're in the box. Otherwise, we are not in the box. So that tells us if we're in the box. We need to know what the population density. So we need to know the population of the city. So we look up this on D city, returning D population. Right. So now the box population and then the size is what we need to know, right? So the population of the box is some product of whether you're in the box and what the population is for each city. The size of the box, right, is equal to, right, row maximum minus row minimum plus 1 times column maximum minus column minimum plus 1. Right, so I think that's probably it, right? Population divided by size is that, because those are, kilometers each box is, so round to the nearest 0. And there we go. Now we're going to do more distances, right? So let us bring back my things here, but instead of being based on a box, let's see, what if I do X text split of this, like by this. Not going to need this stuff. So to be in the range, it's going to be based on, I don't need any of that. It's going to be based on the distance, right? So this I'm going to call, the row of the center and the column of the center. So the distance here is the square root of this row number minus the center row number squared plus the same thing here, but for the column, right? So the column is in K, the city's column, the center's column, square it, square root that whole thing. Is this in the right place? Probably not. That's that squared plus each other, close the square root like that. I think that's it. It's distance in kilometers, right? This I think matches here. And I need to know if it's within that number, right? So in circle is if this is less than or equal to this, the radius locked, then 1 it's in, otherwise 0 it's not in. Now I need to make the weighted average for birth life expectancy. So there's your birth life expectancy, and it's weighted by the population, right? So now I'm going to look up the city name on the city name. It's an extraneous thing there. Returning on the birth life expectancy. And then for this one, it's the same thing, but returning on the population. Clicking on that. So now to do a weighted average, right? So the numerator is the sum product of whether it's in the circle, what the life expectancy is, and the population. All that is some product in the numerator, and then the denominator is the same thing, but without the life expectancy, right? So if I just remove the life expectancy here for this sum product, now I've got that in years. This needs to be multiplied by 12 to get months and rounded to the nearest integer to get the correct answer. I also need to account for the case that there are no cities, in which case the instructions say to output 0. All right, so we should have 1,000 points so far, which we do. The highest household income is that city there, Oilboro. Which state has the most cities? Well, just, do something like this, but instead of the sum of population, I do the count of city. And then, the biggest on here, returning on here, except for the grand total, obviously, is Excel state. Which row has the highest population? Well, I've got everything by row over here already, right? So if I look up this on the data city, returning on the data population. So now I've got, what? Row, column, population. I could do the group by formula, but I don't know. I like doing it this way. So the rows, sum of population, the biggest of this, returning on this. And yes, I do have to get rid of the grand total again. Guess that's what makes it slower, right? Row number 2. Yeah, which row is it asking for, right? Total population of all cities that are not in Excel state. Well, if I get rid of Excel state, if I'd say everything here except for Excel state, and then I grab all these populations, That's going to be it, right? I don't want to have to memorize that number, so I'm just going to do the sum like this. And then, okay, so what cities touching a water tile? What is the average per capita income? All right, so gonna need a new map to take care of this water tile business. So M2, I'm gonna put a, nope, I'm not gonna call the water Woodlawn. That's the name of a city. I'm gonna call the water W. And then what? Fill color here. Now I'm gonna make another map here that shows you where all my water cells are. Now back here on the main map, I'm going to use neighbors. I'm going to use neighbors list, but I'm not going to remember the arguments unless I copy it over. So I'm going to copy over my instructions here. And then I'm going to do neighbors list of the center is T3. The size is 1. The boundaries are nothing. And diagonal allowed is 0. No, diagonals are not allowed. So now I've got that. So now I XLOOKUP that on M2, right? On here, returning here. And you know, if it's nothing, you can just put nothing. Put these in a row rather than have to deal with a separate formula. Just gonna do it this way. So now count if that W. All right, is this, I don't know why this wants to spell out here, right? So 2 row up, I think it just needs to calculate, right? Yeah. It's going to take a second to do these lookups and use my user defined function for the neighbors list. Probably faster if it was a Lambda. I'm going to do that someday. All right, so now I've got the cities that are close to water. So I'm going to put this in, you know, bonus 5 sheet here. You know, I can just do another one of these here to say I only want the cities that are close to water, which are these. Now I'm going to look up what am I supposed to figure out about them? Average income per capita. All right, so XLOOKUP that on D city, returning D per person income. That's the per person income of that city. I also need to know the population to do the weighted average. So there is that. So the weighted average is some product of this and this divided by the sum of population, right? Which is this one, the smaller one. And that should be my answer. It says round. Let's just get rid of that. Stop the clock. Thank you for watching.